Mr. Farrell, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here. I'll have to correct you in how you pronounce my surname. Maybe in Australia I'm a Farrell, but I'm a Farrell in Ireland. But the Farrell is beautiful, man. I love it. I sound very important.
So, we're going to get into Cocaine Diaries, which is this remarkable profile that you made of a comrade of yours, an Irishman who had found himself as a drug mule in Venezuela. Looking into your work, there's so many different angles to go from, but I just wanted to start with this, that it seems to be a good time to be publishing a novel set in Venezuela if you want some sort of Hollywood deal.
Well, look, I tell you what, anybody who looks at that book on Amazon, Last Call of Caracas is the name of the novel. They probably think, well, man, this guy, he writes really fast. He saw Donald Trump come into power, he sat there and went, boom. But no, I started the book about 8 years ago. It's been through several drafts, and all I can say is in the last year, I rewrote the conspiracy of the novel to be a bit more up to date. Connected to the headlines, includes Tren de Agua, the supposed cartel that's taken over America, if you believe Donald Trump. So it's the backdrop, the narco conspiracy in the novel is ripped out of the headlines, but things in the book, a kind of a funny angle which I'm going to use in the publicity. And I haven't published the book yet. It's coming out in April. But I had to write very quick at the end because part of the ending, this is not a spoiler, includes a scene where the US attacks Venezuela. Now, this was purely fiction. I thought this could never happen. Nonsense. People think I'm crazy. But I wrote it anyway. Then all of a sudden, the US attacked Venezuela. I took Maduro out of Caracas in the middle of the night. Now I thought, I can't believe this. I'll have to get this book finished faster. Now, I was in the editing stage of the book, not the writing part, so I was almost there. And I saw the news that Maduro was snatched. I was like, no, Donald Trump, wait, give me 2 more months. I'm nearly there. Stop. Call back the special forces. But no, everything is fine. Venezuela will be in the news for a long time to come. So as far as a media hook is concerned,
Are you tempted to go back in and rewrite the ending for something that matches more what happened in reality?
I'm desperate to go back. I tried to go back November 2024. I had my tickets booked. I paid for them. And people talked me out of it. People said, don't go, you get snatched on the streets. The worst thing what would probably happen, likely, is that I contacted a media fixer. I wanted to go over and do journalism before Donald Trump kicked in and Venezuela's big in the news. But I also wanted to get on the ground and research certain aspects of the book that I couldn't do from afar. Now, yeah, I've been in Venezuela, okay, a couple of years, but back in the Hugo Chavez years, the country has changed. It's worse. So I wanted to get there and see it with my own eyes. So I booked the tickets, media fixer and friends on the ground in Caracas said, you won't get past the airport. The biggest fear that I had was that, they don't let any journalists in general, but the biggest fear for me was that I reported in Ukraine 6 or 7 times over the past 3-4 years. And I saw a story that 2 Colombian foreign fighters they fought in Ukraine. On the way back from Ukraine, back to Colombia, they did a stop in Venezuela. They disappeared. 2 weeks, vanished off the face of the earth. Families didn't know where they were. All of a sudden, they popped up back in the news in a courtroom in Moscow. So
Wow.
obviously what happened was the regime in Venezuela picked them up, got a request from the Russian intel. These 2 guys fought in Ukraine, picked them up, they're mercenaries. They weren't mercenaries. They were paid fighters. So because of the Ukraine stamp on my passport, I said, I don't want to get deported. It's bad enough getting locked up in a prison in Venezuela, but I don't want to get deported to Moscow. Another thing is that, the book that I wrote about Venezuela, it's hardly flattering. I mean, a drug mule gets caught in the airport with cocaine and he gets raped. I'm not giving much away about the book. That's well documented. So I said to myself, if they caught me at the airport and they found out that I wrote that book, they said, this guy's the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. He knows what the prisons are like. How could he be so stupid to come here? People would laugh at me. So I was talked out of it rightly. I was going to go back again next week because of what's happening. Again, I was talked out of it again. So no, I'd love to go back, love to report, but I can't take the chance of getting locked up in prison in Venezuela. I can't do it.
Isn't there an angle where you could let the Irish authorities know that this is who you are, this is what you're intending to do, this is a likely outcome when I get there, and that could provide some type of buffer for you?
It's not a bad idea. I don't think there's anything they can do. They did have somebody on the ground in the past. They had a consular at least. There's no embassy. So I get no embassy support if I get locked up when I get there. No embassy support. The nearest Irish embassy is in Mexico. The consular, they took the consular a decade ago. So there's not much I can do, you know? I mean, yeah, there'll be a bit of noise, but they could still put me in prison for 2 or 3 days even. I don't know if I
Unbelievable.
can handle it.
What
I
aspects of the
can't.
book did you want to go back to explore?
Well, I mean, the novel, the prison book is obviously done and dusted, but the novel, I wanted to just get on the ground. What does the place look like again? What's it smell like? Pick up the sounds. All the things you want to capture to make a book good. You can do a lot these days on YouTube, and you can look at videos. I can call people on video calls, and it is fantastic. But nothing beats being on the ground for obvious reasons. That's why news organizations want journalists to go into Venezuela. Yeah, you can report from afar. You can send a report to Cucuta, which is, I've had hundreds of reporters to send it on Cucuta. It's a border town with Venezuela, where all the international press went the day after Maduro was snatched in the middle of the night. They tried to cross the border. And most of them ended up being detained, not for very long, for several hours, and then let go and told, look, we know you're a journalist, just get out and don't come back. So everybody wants to be in Venezuela as a reporter at the moment, but it's difficult times.
Is that how dire it is there? It's like the similar level of press access that Gaza might get or something.
I haven't been on the ground in Gaza, but yeah, Venezuela doesn't want foreign journalists on the ground. They want to shut down the news. There's poverty, there's hunger, there's misery. There's people going through bins on the streets all around the city. There's bullets flying in the barrios. It's basically a lawless territory that's overrun, or run, maybe you could say. It's run by these armed groups called colectivos. They're basically armed civilians. They're loyal to the regime. The regime knows that it can't have eyes and ears everywhere at the same time. They have a military, they have the police, but they can't be in the slums all across the country. So they get civilians who are loyal to the regime to put on a red shirt. They get on motorbikes, they carry guns. So if a protest pops up around the city, the colectivos go rock up on motorbikes, shotguns, rifles, revolvers. They threaten off the protesters and they take pop shots. So they can take a level of violence that the government itself can't do at times. So they're basically everywhere. And just to bring it right up to date, so I have a friend who's he's in a barrio in Caracas, in the west of the city. So when the U.S. abducted Maduro in the early hours, I had a guy on the ground I could get quotes off, which was great. So I rang him up it was about 7 a.m. in Caracas, and I said, "How's things?" He said, "Oh yeah, it's a little bit hairy. Just hang on, I'm driving across the city." And he said, "Hang on, I'll have to call you back. There's a guy coming up to the car with a machine gun."
Oh my God.
Said, "I'll have to hang up." So I said, "Oh no, what am I going to do if this guy gets, locked up or shot up or?" But I called him back a couple of hours later. I got through to him and he said, "Look, everything's okay." But they were collectivos. They stopped everybody across the city. The collectivos basically took to the streets the morning after the U.S. Took Maduro out of the city. They basically showed their presence. They're saying, "We're loyal to the regime. If you take to the street, if you celebrate Trump abducting Maduro, we're coming for you. We're taking you out of your house. And we're going to bring it to the police, bring it to the authorities." So that's what they've done. So there's nobody running around the streets of Venezuela saying Trump, Trump, Trump. not unless you want to go to prison.
And your mates down there who you're calling to get the sense and feel for what Venezuela is like, how are they talking about what their regular life actually looks like now, beyond what you just described?
Their regular life, They have a salary from abroad. They live comfortable. I'm talking about an expat. I mean, I talk to Venezuelans as well. Actually, you know what? I can't talk to Venezuelans. I talk to Venezuelans who live abroad. The Venezuelans, I can't. My Venezuelan friends who have all fled Venezuela live here in Spain. They live around the world. I say to them, look, can you put me in touch with people on the ground in Caracas? They said no. Everybody's terrified to talk. I said, look, I have a podcast. I'll speak to them anonymously. And I said, no, we can't do it. I said, listen, nobody listens to my podcast. I can guarantee you the Venezuelan intelligence won't pick it up. And they said, no. What happens is the authorities, including the colectivo, they stop people on the street and say, show me your phone. So they look through people's phones, they break into their houses, stop them on the street, show me your phone. If they see a phone call abroad, questions will be asked. And you could be disappeared. You could be taken off to a detention center, tortured. Your family might not see you for years. Maybe a year later, they find out you're in prison and they'll spend a long time trying to get you back out. So that's what happens. Actually, my contact in Caracas, he said, simply to write a message on your phone to say you support Trump and you're anti-Maduro. If the authorities see that text message, you can go to prison for 30 years. So if that gives you a good sense why people are afraid to talk, why foreign journalists can't get into the country, it's the fear of information getting out from Venezuela about the horrible lives that people live.
It's much more of a regime of terror than I was expecting to hear, because I feel like I've watched lots of travel YouTube guys that go throughout Caracas and maybe other parts of Venezuela. I don't know how dated it is, to be fair, but they're obviously not painting a picture of prosperity, but not one that is as brutal against any type of deterrence to the regime as you would expect in the good old days of Iraq. Or
I've seen those videos and yeah, I've looked at them for my own research because I can't really get into the country. What I'll say is there was Venezuela before Maduro stole the elections, and there's Venezuela after Maduro stole the elections. So when I tried to get back into Venezuela in November 2024, the inauguration of Maduro was set for mid-January 2025. So when the whole story broke in the international media and the Western leaders all came out and denounced the results, I said that Edmundo Gonzalez won the elections. The Venezuelan authorities stopped letting foreign journalists into the country. Not stopped it completely, but they made it very difficult. So the time I was trying to get back in November 2024 was when the authorities really cracked down on foreign journalists or anybody coming into the country to document what's happening on the ground. They were very nervous, very sensitive. And one guy I know, for example, he's a coffee farmer. He's a European guy. He's been there 30 years. He came back into Venezuela from a trip home to Europe, and he was detained for up to 8 hours, where the intelligence services questioned him, wanted to know why he was coming back to Venezuela. So they were very good, he said, from a level of intelligence and police work. They phoned everybody he knew in Venezuela, including his wife. They wanted to check up his claims that he lived in Venezuela, that he had a business there. So there you go. That's the insight. He said he's never had that experience in the past. And I know from traveling to Venezuela in the past, you flash your passport, you get into the country, no great difficulties. But since Maduro stole the elections, as we all know, everything's changed.
but now Maduro's in New York. What's going to happen to the country?
Well, here's a good quote from my European friend. He said, "Nothing changes." He said, the mustachioed leader went to New York on his holidays. Nothing's changed. Nothing. So your guess is as good as mine. The day since Maduro was snatched and taken out of Venezuela, the regime is still there. The same regime continues to reign over the country. The only big change I could see coming would be if elections, then naturally there will be election in 3 or 4 years. But I suspect the US will force elections within a year or so, under the guidance or suggestion or advice by Maria Corina Machado, who is an opposition activist.
Who
So
sort of
for
lives
now, nothing's
underground and
changed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So day-to-day life in Venezuela hasn't changed. And I can't see it changing until at least there's elections.
so you decided to set your novel in Venezuela. The book you wrote on Paul Keeney, which we'll get to, is obviously a Venezuelan story. What's your relationship with this country? When does it start, and why does it hold such a firm grip over you?
The book that I wrote, Paul Keeney's story, in the cocaine diary, about his time getting locked up in Venezuela, it was fascinating to be involved in. It was a harrowing experience. I mean, we can talk about that later, but it was his story. It wasn't my story. So I always wanted to write my story set in Venezuela. Now, it's a novel, it's fiction. It features a reporter protagonist. He's nothing like me. I have
Bit
to
of a
say that
projection.
I have to say that he's nothing like me, or my mother might be in trouble. She might get in trouble with me if she reads it, you know. But I was always the country never left me. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. I mean, a country with all this oil, some of the biggest known oil reserves in the world. Yet there's people hungry. When I was in Venezuela, there wasn't much hunger. There was a lot of money knocking around the economy, but there was things that I couldn't get my head around. You walk into a supermarket, there's no food, there's no rice, there's no flour, there's no chicken, there's no milk. And before I went to Venezuela, I knew nothing about socialism. I had a vague idea that, it didn't work because of what happened in the Soviet Union. But when I got to Venezuela, I saw with my own eyes, it doesn't work. You know, I meet these lefties in Ireland and around the world. Oh, but it's a socialist paradise. Everybody has free access to healthcare, free food, subsidized food. Everybody lives so well. I say, no, they don't. You go into the supermarket, you queue for 3 hours to buy a packet of rice. This is not a socialist paradise. It doesn't work. But then, you walk out of the supermarket where you queue for 3 hours to buy rice. You get into a big old American car, vintage American car, a Mustang from the 70s. You rock up to the gasoline station. You fill up the car for $1. I think this is crazy. They had to work for a week to buy a bag of rice. And they filled up a Mustang for the price of a cup of coffee in in a fancy cafe in Caracas. The whole spectrum of the country, the socialist end of thing, or the failed socialist aspect, that stuck with me. And another funny angle about the socialism is that the corruption that went on in it. There was a supermarket, maybe it still exists, that subsidized food for the people, which sounds great, wonderful. Cheap food, cheap rice. But then I regularly cross back and forth into Colombia. I used to go to towns called Cucuta, which was a crossing between western Venezuela, Táchira State. And I used to cross in the northwest up in Maracaibo into La Guaira. And I go into the local markets, as you do, cross over, get a bit of food, coffee, water. And I'd find all this Venezuelan food from the supermarkets in Venezuela. You'd look at the back of the packet of rice. Hugo Chávez, say thanks to Hugo Chávez. So obviously what was happening was the people around the supermarkets in Venezuela said, look, we can sell the food and not make any money, or very little. Or we can ship the food over the border into Colombia and make good money. So socialism doesn't work. Human nature is greed and profit, and so it didn't work.
So it was interesting from some type of socio-political perspective. You'd never seen a place like this. The great paradox is that you can see $1 for a full tank of petrol, yet 3 hours to queue up to get a bag of rice. But even more than that, what was it about just how rich your experience was when you were originally there? Maybe it was formational, maybe meeting Paul Keeney. Why does this country still live with you and you love it?
It's a good question. I don't know if I love it. I mean, I had this chat with a foreign correspondent friend who lived it there for a good 10 years. He said he loves it and he hates it. I probably loved it and I hated it. I mean, the people stuck with me probably more than anything. And the hospitality was wonderful. I used to crisscross the country in 20-hour bus trips on stories, stop in small towns. People I would meet would bring me into their homes and feed me. And if I was sick, people would say, "Oh yeah, yeah, I have asthma." So people would say, "Oh yeah, I know the local doctor, the local health, the local pharmacy. Hang on, I'll get you some medicine." You know, somebody'd hop on a motorbike, come back 20 minutes later with a Ventolin inhaler. I think, what
Mm,
kind of a country is
mm,
that's amazing. These strangers went off to get me medicine when I'm sick. And they really worked together among themselves. I was sick and I got amoeba from probably from ice in a drink or something some night. But only I was very sick, and you go to the pharmacy. It doesn't I couldn't. The hospital gave me great service that I paid for, but then you go to the pharmacy and there's no medicine. And I thought, "Oh, man, this is just ridiculous. This country with all this oil and all this wealth is not distributed, and they can't get medicine." But anyway, I'd walk away from the pharmacy. What could I do? Nothing. Well, then I'd walk the streets. I'd be walking. This is a city called Merida in the Andes. I'd bump into the pharmacist the next day. "Is everything okay? How are you feeling? I'll do my best to get you that medicine." So the people probably stuck with me. The people and the landscape. It has everything across the country. Desert. I lived up in the Andes in Merida, mountains, snow. I used to go down to Los Llanos, a desert area. I used to get down to south of Venezuela, Roraima. It's a big mountain range on the border with Brazil. I'd go north
wow.
again to Angel Falls. I'd go to the island, the diversity. It had everything. Beautiful country. And I would say I traveled heavily for 3 years in South America as a correspondent. It was easily the most beautiful country that I've been to. And I have to say, with the most beautiful women. I have to. My girlfriend mightn't like me saying that. She's from Brazil, but in Brazil, they're beautiful as well. But so the country, it never left me. So that's a good point there. How did the country? Why am I still writing about Venezuela
Why does it
15
still live
years
in your
later?
mind?
And that's a good question. I don't know if I can fully answer, but it's still there.
Could you offer us a little geographic introduction to the country, kind of Tim Marshall or Peter Zeihan style? How big is it? Where's the population centers? What's the population of the whole country? But if you can offer that comprehensive geographical introduction to Venezuela.
I'll do my best. As a country, I think when the US recently abducted Maduro, somebody said they could never occupy it properly because it's twice the size of Iraq. So it's an enormous country in the northeast, kind of, if you see South America on the north and the northwest of Colombia at that tip before it breaks up into a small branch and you go into Central America. So it occupies a huge swathe of territory. There's about 27 to 30 million is the population figure that was going around, but this has been decimated since 2014. They've lost a third of their population
A
through emigration
third.
since 2004. 8
Holy
million
hell.
people left the country, almost a third. 8 million people fled across the continent, many to the United States, many to Colombia, many around to Argentina, Chile, Peru, seeking a better life. Particularly since 2014, the price of a barrel of oil collapsed and it sparked massive emigration from the country. So that economic crash destroyed the population. But back to the geography of the country. So you have Caracas. So the northern part of the country is the Caribbean coast. Caracas is the capital city. It's about an hour from the coast. You fly into an airport called Simon Bolivar Maiquetía. Maiquetía Simon Bolivar International Airport, which everybody says is Caracas, but it's just outside Caracas. It's about an hour outside. It's right on the coast. Caracas is slightly inland. So Caracas has a population of over 1 million. It's hemmed in by a mountain range called El Avila, which stretches across a mountain range across the north of Venezuela. So there's Caracas. It's a bowl. It's like a valley. It is a valley. It's like a bowl where all the people live. So people are crammed into the city. There's not enough space for people to live. So you have the wealthy people in probably the northern suburbs of the city live very well. Swimming pools, servants, staff to cut the grass. And you move, there's big banks, there's embassies, there's oil companies. But then you get in your car half hour, an hour away, and there's people living in dire poverty in the slums. They're basically little houses that people built over time. One small house on top of another small house, top of another small house. So these little houses crawl across the hills around the valley. They were illegally built. They're basically people who came to Venezuela in the oil boom years, 60s and 70s. People from rural Venezuela wanted a better life, wanted the job, came to the city for a new life. So there wasn't enough space, built houses where they could. So that's what Caracas looks like. So across from Caracas, then, different diversity areas you would say would be right to the west on the border with Colombia is Maracaibo, which is like a world in itself. It's mostly a desert area. It's the oil center of Venezuela, not completely. There's Orinoco as well in the south. It's kind of Maracaibo is the oil area, the oil region, red sand, huge, wide, flatlands that disappear as far as the eye can see. And in terms of diversity of climate, Caracas, very good, mild, beautiful weather year round. Maracaibo, steaming heat, steaming tropical heat. So then south from Maracaibo, you have Merida, which is up in the Andes. It's the Andes mountain range, snow-capped mountains, adventure sports, cheaper living, mostly safer than Caracas. Further south, you would have Los Llanos, which is the flatlands, basically. Basically, it's sand, cowboy country, farmers. Further again, south end towards Brazil, you have, but further south, you have the Amazon region. So Venezuela shares the Amazon region with Colombia, Brazil. Peru has a stretch in there as well. Ecuador, possibly, I think. I'll have to look back at that. So it has the Amazon region, it has the Andes. Then you go further west or east from the Amazon area, you have Roraima area, which borders Brazil. So the north of Brazil, where the north of Brazil and Venezuela meet. East of Venezuela, you have the British Guyana and so on. North from Roraima, you go north, you head towards Angel Falls, famous waterfalls in Venezuela. You get back on a bus, as I did. Another 20 years, you head north to the main cities. Big port cities are Valencia, and another big port city I can't remember quite now. The islands, of course, it encompasses island. Famous islands would probably be Isla Margarita, which was a huge tourist draw in the 70s, 80s, up until 2010, till crime got out of hand. So they're the island region of Los Roques, a famous island as well. Big tourist draw in the past, beautiful, beautiful sand, great, Caribbean tropical weather, fancy resort hotels. Again, I haven't been to Los Roques, but I can't imagine they're doing too well at the moment. I know Isla Margarita is deserted of tourism. It's destroyed.
And so, how old were you when you first went there? Because you mentioned it in the Cocaine Diaries, but you were a aspiring journalist, essentially. And you described yourself as a backpacking journalist. And you had discovered this story of the Irish fella in the prison, Paul Keeney. And we'll get to the incredibly serendipitous moment where you discover him, I think, a year later or something in the Colombian airport. But how old were you when you came into Venezuela? And then take us from there, what you were doing.
I was just turning 30 when I went into Venezuela. The years are going fast these days. Yeah, I was just turned 30 and pushing 30. I was pushing 30. I went into Venezuela. So I had a very comfortable staff job in Ireland as a journalist, but I didn't get into journalism to sit at a desk. So when this company I was in Ireland, they touted a redundancy scheme. I don't know what the word in Australia would be, but they offered a lot of money to tell everybody to fuck off. It's basically what they said. And I put my hand up and say, yeah, I'll take that. I'll get out of here. Thank you very much. Looked at the map and, so I wanted to start on a career of foreign journalism, foreign correspondence. So I looked at the map. I said, okay, where will I go? I looked at the Middle East, lots of wars going on. I don't speak any of the language. Extremely difficult to be as a freelancer, I suspect. Venezuela, I was interested in as well. It wasn't big in the news in Europe, but it got a lot of coverage, at least in the US. And I said, that's somewhere I could go. I could start there. There won't be huge competition with other journalists. Iraq and so on, the Middle East. For sure, it's already crawling with staff journalists from wire agencies and staff newspapers and so on. So when I got to Venezuela, I realized that I was right. There wasn't a huge number of journalists on the ground. So I picked a good spot. What I didn't do, I did my research well to get to Venezuela, pick a good country to start. But I didn't, I didn't realize how difficult it was to speak a foreign language. How difficult it was to learn it. I said, yeah, Spanish, dos cervezas. I picked that up easy, 3 months. No, I hit the ground running. But yeah, it was extremely difficult. And when you get there and you realize there's 32 ways to conjugate a verb, you go, oh, this is not going to be easy. But anyway, I did a crash course in Spanish and hit the ground running, did my best with. After 6 months, I could hold down an interview. I wasn't very good, but I could hold down an interview and record it and bring it back to somebody who spoke better Spanish than I did and say, what did he say? So that was that. And I got your question, but so why did I pick Venezuela or?
No, the question was more, you definitely answered the first part of it, but it was mostly and then what were you doing? But I think you've kind of described that. So there was something that came up there which I thought was interesting, because you were 30 when you went, and there were these wars in the Middle East. Were there any foreign correspondents you were modeling yourself on, journalists you admired who you wanted to sort of emulate what they were doing, just in your own style and flavor in your own place?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, there's Robert Fisk who covered the Middle East. He's a British journalist
Very
who lived in
famous.
Ireland, worked for
Didn't he,
the,
isn't he infamous?
he, yes and no. Yes and no. He was a well-established correspondent for the Independent in London. I liked his work, his coverage of the Middle East. I would say I was probably more driven by not highbrow correspondence, but in general, I was attracted to the lifestyle, if not any particular journalist, of flying into a country, hitting the ground, parachute journalists, get in,
Telling a good
cover
story.
a war, conflict, hoover it up, be there, be on the front line of history, rather than any particular journalist. But yeah, I mean, journalists like, Hunter S. Thompson, who wasn't necessarily a correspondent, but the lifestyle that he lived, went to South America, traveled around, drank, went to parties, had fun, but did his work seriously as
And had
well.
his own style.
Had his own style. That's what I was attracted to as well, particularly, yeah. As well as just going to somewhere different and being a foreign correspondent. And maybe what I wanted most was to tell people back home what's happening in another place. I know now these days with technology, it's not such a big deal, but at least when I went to Venezuela, I was telling people what was happening on the ground in Ireland and America. So the biggest market for me as a journalist there was the United States. They were obviously the big Latin American population. So that was probably the biggest market that I hit. I was a correspondent for the Miami Herald newspaper quite quickly when I picked up stories fast. I think I'd say when they got my email from Venezuela, they went, yes, we found the journalist stupid enough to go to Venezuela. Wonderful. Let's use this guy. Nobody else wants to go.
That same romanticization for consuming the work of a foreign correspondent on the ground, is there a part of you that sort of laments or is sentimental about that appetite, which has since been lost? And there just doesn't seem to be the same amount of appetite. And you can see it in the economics of the mastheads who would have beforehand employed multiple people doing that type of work. The Robert Fisks, or the New Yorker having John Lee Andersons in all these different type of countries. Now there's only one John Lee Anderson left, for example.
Absolutely. The business model, the economic model of the media is destroyed. It's gone. The days of newspapers hiring journalists to travel the world and you know, you're in your desk in London and somebody taps you on the shoulder. Oh, hey, jump on a plane and go to Gaza. It's becoming f- fewer and far between. So yeah, that's pretty tragic. Yeah, the money's just not there anymore. On the other side, you could argue that it's given freelancers a bigger opportunity to to get their name out there, get the stories into the traditional media. What I would say to freelancers these days, though, is that okay, you get your name in the New York Times. Okay, wonderful. They pay you $120, $150. How are you going to pay your bills with that?
No, you can't.
So you can. So when I traveled across Ukraine, we can talk about this again later if you like, but I went with a photographer. And when we filed at the press and we got the we got the payments that we were getting, they weren't huge. We both realized that, you know, in the future, or even now, it's probably started already, the future of foreign journalism is in the hands of, this is his quote, and I agree with it. It's in the hands of trust fund kids. Trust fund kids in the US. Mommy and daddy's got a lot of money in the bank. Oh, I want to be a journalist. Go off to Ukraine. There's a war. They can finance themselves to travel these countries and send stories back. Will they be good at what they do? I don't know. But they can get there on the ground and do something that other journalists can't. Uh,
Fuck, Jeff, that's a depressing outlook.
I didn't paint it very well. On the other side, a lot of the trust fund kind of style kids, they will work for traditional media. They want their name in lights. But there's another economic model opening up, which I would have done in Venezuela. I actually lament the fact that the technology wasn't there when I was on the ground in Venezuela. That YouTube wasn't what it is. Podcasting didn't exist. I relied on paychecks from traditional media to live. And ultimately, I couldn't live. So I went, after 3 years, I went on, did some great stories, really proud of them, did some great adventures. But I had to pack my bags and go home. I could not live on what the press paid me. It wasn't possible. I see now guys in Ukraine, for example, who got into the war early, went onto YouTube, built up a following on Instagram, YouTube, the podcast. They go to Patreon and they get people to support their work and buy them a coffee and these kind of websites. So a new model has opened up. But again, you still need a pile of money to get on the ground and get started. And most young journalists don't have, most aspiring forward correspondents probably don't have that financial base to get going. But there is a new market opening up where you can bypass traditional media.
Yeah. The appetite seems still there, but just the style of the content is changing. Because you can look at, there's a guy called Bald and Bankrupt, who I'm sure you've seen on YouTube, who would make an enormous living for himself. But it's obviously not the reason why he's doing it. And it's a very, very personal style of essentially walking through a city with some bloke. Or then there's Andrew Callahan of Channel 5 News, which is an American documentarian who's now swanning around the world with a Shane Smith, the old fella from Vice. They're going to be going to all the hot spots of American foreign policy interest. I think Cuba and Turkmenistan and Greenland and all the rest. So there's obviously still an economic opportunity for it, but at least I would share your lament for the masthead being the financier of it, and therefore all the checks and balances and editorial discipline that you would get from the outcome of having that masthead there. At the end of the day, the quality of the work is just significantly more rich to consume.
I fully agree. And what I found in Ukraine is that journalists who go out there who build up these following on YouTube and Instagram and so on, they blur the lines between journalism and activism. They start off as journalists, then all of a sudden, Ukraine is the best. Ukraine is the same. Ukraine can do nothing wrong. I don't follow them anymore. It's not journalism anymore for
Whereas a
me.
masthead would have kept it in check, more likely,
Yeah,
at least.
an editor would have said, "Look, tone that down." You know, you send your copy back to a news desk in London or Sydney or New York, and they read all this. Yeah, Ukraine is perfect copy. They go, "Sorry, buddy, you need to balance that out. That's not partial. It needs to be impartial. Impartial journalism." You'd be told by an editor to get different quotes for your story, or get other quotes for your story to make it balanced. So that's missing in that kind of what would you call a citizen journalism? No, backpack journalism. I don't know what you want to call it, but podcast journalism.
All right. Well, look, Jeff, we're 40 minutes in. Paul Keeney hasn't got much of a mention. So you're about 6 months to a year into your first backpacking journalistic forays into Venezuela. And you go into this prison, Los Teques, and you're trying to get a story back for, I think it was an Irish newspaper, or at least Irish media at the time. And you interviewed this fella who was kind of mealy-mouthed. He didn't want to say much. And you thought you had a good story here. You sent it back home. It got a little bit of radio coverage, but then the story sort of died, even though you knew in your heart there was something much more here. And the story continues. About a year later, there's the most unbelievably serendipitous encounter in another country in an airport. And then that's from where the Cocaine Diaries comes.
Yeah, went into the prison in Venezuela, and I can give you a little bit of color about the prison if you like.
Color it all in.
Went into the prison, queued up. I tried to get in for 6 months through the official channels as a journalist. So I wrote into the Ministerio de Justicia, requested press access, and didn't get any response. Went down to the Ministerio de Justicia, knocked on the door, got nowhere. So there was an Irish priest I knew. Oh,
There always
my
is
God,
one.
everywhere in the world is an Irish priest. Everywhere I've traveled in developing countries, and those guys are my best stories, man. They're not the story of them, but they're the best contacts.
The doors they.
But anyway, exactly, can open doors. So I rang up this particular Irish priest, his housemaid. Yeah, priests have housemaid. His housemaid answered the phone. She said, he's not here. He went to visit 2 Irish guys in Los Teques. And I thought, wow, that's it right there. This guy, this priest has my access to this story. Fantastic. So I figured out he was visiting these 2 priests in the prison. Oh, sorry, he's visiting these 2 Irish guys in the prison. So I got a hold of him again. I said, look, I've been trying to get in here for 6 months. What do I do? He said, forget about emailing as a journalist to the press office of the ministry, the Justice Ministry. Forget about it. Just go up as a member of the public on I think it was a Sunday morning. I can't remember. So I went up, brought a couple of bags of food, went to this prison in the outskirts, about an hour outside Caracas. The heat was burning into my head, midday heat. Spent 2 hours in a queue, but all, hundreds of Venezuelans queuing up to visit their loved ones inside. I was carrying a couple of bags of food, got in. I was the last. What was interesting about that was fate happened, not just when I met Paul Keeney later on, but the minute I walked into the prison, I was the last person to walk into the prison and the public access. The guards, the army closed the gate behind me because they said, that's enough for today. So there might have been 100 people outside. By chance, I was the last to get through the gates. Brought in, I was patted down, semi-strip searched. The army looked through the food that I had. Everything's okay. I mean, I saw the military outside the prison. Makes perfect sense. The Guardia Nacional, armed to the teeth, assault rifles, towers, guys with heavy-duty assault rifles. Yeah, normal. It's a prison. I expect that. Went into the prison, knocked on the door, went into a cell block called Maxima. And the guy who opened it was kind of a corrugated iron door. The guy who opened the door, he was holding a pistol in his hand, a revolver. I thought, okay, that's fine. Normal, it's a prison. Another guy came up to me again with a gun, civilian clothes. He wasn't dressed like the prison officers outside. The prison officers were armed with batons. I went into the cell block. The officers were armed with guns. A few minutes later, I saw this guy dancing dancing salsa with his partner beside a Christmas tree, with a gun, a rifle swinging off his belt. And then when I realized they're not, they're not prison officers. They're prisoners, armed prisoners. So I eventually got somebody called for Paul Keeney, and I sat there just shaking my head. Didn't speak to Paul for very long. To give it a bit of context, I was robbed at gunpoint a few days earlier. I was held up, gun right in my head, and it still had me rattled. So I didn't speak to Paul very long. He couldn't stay for very long anyway for the visit. and I wanted to get at. So,
How many
go on,
years
sorry.
into his sentence was it when you first met him?
He was very soon into his sentence. I mean, weeks, at the most 2 months,
Okay.
I'd say,
Okay.
maximum, because he was still he was wearing a pair of black dress shoes like you might wear to a job interview. And I was, this guy's in a prison in Venezuela wearing these black dress shoes. But
The
that's
same
what he wore when
ones
he
he
got,
was nicked. Yeah.
that's what he wore when he was arrested in the airport in Caracas. So he still wore the same shoes. Anyway, as you say, I didn't get much of an interview. I didn't stay very long. He had to escort me out of the prison. He said, I have to look like a prisoner as well. If I look like a journalist or, diplomat or somebody, he said, I'll get kidnapped. There's a chance I'll get kidnapped. And the prisoners will use me as a pawn to get better conditions in the prison from the authorities. Anyway, got out of the prison, as you say, did a brief story short enough story for the radio in Ireland. I did it, I used his name. I had no quotes. I didn't have any recording device. So that was it. Left Venezuela very soon after getting held up at gunpoint and that experience in the prison with all the guns. I had enough. After a year and a half, I had enough. Went off, reported around South America, interesting stories for 3 years. After 3 years, as I stated earlier, the pay was so bad from the press in Britain and Ireland and in the US, at least after 2008, after the economic crash. I couldn't make it pay anymore, the journalism. So I said, okay. In 2010, I think, I'd have to look back at the dates. I said, I'm out of here. I booked a flight from Bogota back to Dublin. There was a stop there's a stop in Frankfurt on the way back. And I heard somebody speak, had an Irish, English mix in his accent, but it didn't strike me. It threw me in and I said, that sounds vaguely familiar. But I didn't pursue who it might be. Got on the plane from Frankfurt back to Dublin, landed in Dublin airport, went to the immigration. I was queuing up on one side and there was another queue on the other side. And there was two people being interrogated by the immigration officers. And they were saying, look, what are you doing with this emergency passport? So I looked over and the two Irish guys had these little paper passports, which I'm sure the Australian embassies might issue them as well. If your passports get stolen, you get an emergency passport to travel at short notice. So I heard this guy again, given the reason why he had an emergency passport. He said, oh, I was robbed in Colombia. They stole my passport. That's when I looked over and I said, that's the guy I interviewed in the prison in Venezuela. That's to me. Now, what threw me off the scent, you might say, was that he was like that. He was stick thin. But when I interviewed him in the prison, he was kind of heavy, but he was stick thin when I saw him at the airport. So he was in the other queue in the airport. He got through the immigration eventually, himself and another Irish guy who I didn't get to meet in the prison on that day I was there. So I had a bit of a delay in my immigration queue. When I got through the queue, I ran through the airport and I ran up to the baggage belt and I caught the guy I thought was Paul Keeney, and he took his backpack off the conveyor belt. And I stopped him and I said, I know you. He looked at me and said, oh, yeah, you're the guy who came into the prison in Venezuela. I said to him, you know what? The chances of me and you meeting like this, we were on the same flight back from Bogota to Frankfurt to Dublin. The chances of you and you meeting like this, it has to be fate, I said. So I shook his hand and I said, me and you are going to write a book. So we shook hands and we said, let's do it. So gave me his phone number, got in touch with him, got a deal, got the bones of a story, a couple of interviews, pitched it to a couple of publishers. Two publishers wanted the book. On a Monday, I pitched the book. Two publishers wanted it. They wanted a response by Wednesday. So it was an easy book to pitch. It was an easy story to sell. So that's how it came about.
It's such a insane moment of serendipity. What is that moment of recognition when you have left Latin America after these 3 years, and it's because you haven't been paid enough doing journalism? So you're probably thinking in your mind all these other different things that I'm going to have to be doing now. And you see this guy who you know is a gold mine of a story, And but not even that. Just you recognize a guy who was in a prison in Venezuela for being a drug mule. Is there any way to sort of just recreate the complete surprise of that?
I couldn't. Paul Keeney said to me, he said, if you're a gambling man and you put money on that, people think you're mad. People think
Oh,
you're out of your mind.
yeah, you'd be out of your mind.
It's not logical. It's not logical. For me, you can be woo-woo about it and believe in the universe, and it was meant to happen. It was destiny that I was to meet this guy and write a story. And I kind of learned from the experience as well as that I was desperate to get a book when I first met him, get a book out of his story, but it was too difficult to get back into the prison. He was too early in his sentence. I couldn't get back in and out of prison regularly to write a book. The logistics to it wasn't practical. So I kept on the case, and I kept thinking, when I traveled across South America, covered different stories, I kept saying, I want to get back to that story, but I just have to let it go. So I learned that what I learned from my experience was that chase something, have a go, but then let it go. And if it's meant to be, it'll come back to you. So that's what I learned from that experience. I had the goal, I had the dream, the vision to write this book about this guy's story, but then I just let it go and I said, there's nothing I can do.
But you meet him again, you shake hands, you get the deal from the publisher. So obviously, for anyone listening to this that is interested in the story, we'll talk a little bit about it now. But it really is the horrific detail of life inside Los Teques, which is why you would want to sort of read it in full. But are you comfortable telling a bit of the story, a bit of Paul Keeney's life?
I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay.
I was invested in his life for a couple of years, so I know it. Certainly his time in Venezuela, I know very well.
So he had a plumbing business. The GFC kind of ruined him, and he got into a little bit of a recreational cocaine habit in Dublin, and then got approached by a guy who said, well, you can make some easy money if you just go to this country and fly back to Dublin, put something in your bag, no questions asked. How common is that experience for Europeans, especially at this time?
Well, if you judge, if you judge it by the drug mules who are in the prison in Venezuela, I met a few of them, and obviously from Paul Keeney's story, there was dozens.
Mm.
There was 5, 10, then 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 100 at one point.
Wow.
As the global financial crash deepened. So it was common at the time. Educated guys, Paul would tell me about some guy from Israel, educated guy, got into money problems. Polish guy, same thing, got into money problems. Guy tapped him on the shoulder in a bar in the community. Fancy making 10 grand. Holiday to Venezuela. Easy money until it isn't. So yeah, according to Paul and the stories that he told me from the guys in the prison, as well as a second Irish guy, all had similar stories. Not all of them lost money through business or lost their job. Some of them got into drug debts. So they were heavy users in their own country. Got into debt, couldn't pay those debts. And a narco guy would say, look, you want to clear your debt? You go to Venezuela. Guy meet you over there. You be the mule. We'll give you 10 grand. Now, what I couldn't understand, and I still don't understand to this day, why the narco gangs gave these guys so little money as an incentive. 10 grand, 10,000 euros to risk your life in prison. And Paul Keeney had 6 kilos of cocaine in his suitcase. On the street in Ireland, that 6 kilos of cocaine was hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of, at least 6. These days, I mean, a kilo of cocaine is about 80,000 euros. I'm bad at maths, but it's almost 500,000 euros, isn't it? So you get this drug gang is going to make 500,000 euros and it only costs them 10 grand. If I was the drug mule, I would look at the maths and go, hang on a minute, at least give me 50 grand. Give me 10%. So
isn't that the whole point though? They're totally without leverage. They're desperate. If he had said 5 grand, they might have done it, you know?
Yeah, I'm in 10 grand. For a guy from Poland, okay, there's a cheaper economy. But a guy from Ireland, 10 grand, even in the recession time, it
It's a
did
couple weeks
it
rent.
doesn't go very far. So I don't understand how the incentive, but these guys, they're desperate. They're under stress. If they have a debt with a gang back in Ireland, Australia, there's a couple of Australians in the prison. I don't know if you saw in the book. You know, a lot of these guys, there was two guys from Australia who were in the prison with them. But same thing, got into debt back at home with drug gangs, and they didn't have much of a choice. The 10 grand was a bonus to them. Yeah, they didn't have a choice. They were told, you go, this clears your debt, and we'll give you 10 grand as well. If you don't, we shoot you.
Have you tried doing research into uncovering that story within Ireland? Who are these middlemen, this series of middlemen who are taking advantage of rather desperate Irishmen?
No, I wouldn't go near them. And Paul cleverly, rightly pushed me away from going down that road. He said, look, forget about it. So, look, we're going to write a book. I'm already under a feeling in danger. He already felt in danger by doing the book.
Fair
So
enough. Yeah.
he put the word out when it became common knowledge that he was doing a book with me. He made sure he put the word out to people who had hired him that they weren't going to appear in the book. They had nothing to worry about. So no, I didn't go down that route. I didn't touch them. I took Paul's advice.
Is there a part of you now, years later, Paul's gone, that it's a worthwhile story to rekindle?
No, no, it's not something I'm going to look into. I know who it is. I know the gang who it is. I don't need to know the individuals, exactly who was involved. There's a couple of major drug gangs who operate in Dublin. It's not difficult to know which gang was involved, given that I know where Paul was from, what part of Dublin he's from. He's from a very working class part of Dublin called Coolock. It's in the north area of Dublin, where drug gangs would be well entrenched in the area. I know the pub where Paul was propositioned, if you if you like. So some heavy narco guys, heavy gangsters go to that pub. It's actually I think it's gone actually. But these are guys who would, they think nothing about targeting prison police officers. So if prison officers and police officers are worried about these people, I'm not going to take them on. I don't see any benefit to me or society by me going down that road. They end up in court eventually anyway. Some, yeah, they get what's coming to them, and they end up in the court. We all find out who they are in the end anyway.
So Paul is caught even before he leaves the airport. Tragically, he didn't make it very far. And that's when, his horrific story really begins. And I listened to the audiobook, by the way, and as I was listening to it, and the opening night of when he was in that sort of holding cell before he went to the actual prison itself, he's brutally gang raped by multiple guards. And I thought, this is just too much. Like, to be so brazen, to do this on the first night. Was there ever a part of you that was questioning Paul's honesty about how he was treated in certain ways along the story?
I would say that he was gang raped by the anti-drug police in Venezuela. Yeah, of course. I mean, there'd be something wrong with me as a journalist if I didn't question that. And but I thought to myself, how could you? No sensible person would make up that story. There's no benefit to it. Most men would be horribly ashamed for it to be publicly known that they were raped. So for me,
Violently.
to be raped by a gang rape. And he also told me about surgery that he went through on that part of his body. So
Wow.
no, I find it hard to believe anybody would make that up. And there was other parts of the story I thought might have been a bit outlandish, but I couldn't corroborate them at the time I wrote the book. But I met two guys were in the prison with Paul Keeney, and they stood over them. All the accounts of the prison in the book says, yeah, it all happened. Now, they obviously couldn't corroborate, but Paul Keeney was raped because he was on his own. But all the other things in the prison, yeah, it all happened. Nightclubs on the prison roof, prostitutes doing the rounds, crack cocaine everywhere. The prison officers would come in, take all the guns from the gangs. The next day, all the guns come back into the hands of the gangs. Obviously, what was happening, that the army the army took the guns off the gangs, and the army sold the guns back to the gangs.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was common.
A fella accidentally blowing himself up with a hand grenade.
I told people these stories. I even told Venezuelans that story, or the story that the prisoners were armed inside the prison, and they didn't believe me. So it was a hard sell to convince people outside of Venezuela that prisoners were walking around with guns. Even across Latin America, no matter how bad the conditions might be, there is no part of Latin America where prisoners are armed with guns and control the prisons. It doesn't exist. There might be riots and, guys get their heads cut off, all kinds of horror. And maybe the inmates will storm the prison officers and take the guns in the middle of a riot. But Venezuela is the only country where the prisoners are armed and control the prison. The prisoners decide who gets in and out of the prison.
And they
What
take
kind
rent.
of a world? Rent. Force the prisoners to pay a causa, kind of an extortion to stay safe, and tell the military when they can't come in. Oh, you can come in on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Yeah, and you can come back in again on Friday at 3 o'clock. It's just madness.
Was it a power dynamic that was enforced because of the power they could exert outside of the prison? Or was it all just simply explicable via corruption and the money that could be greased into people's palms?
It revolved around money. A lot of these heavyweight narcos who ran these narco gangs, there was a name for them in Spanish. Ooh, yeah, a prani. So these guys were like Tren de Agua, for example. It's a well-known transnational Venezuelan criminal gang that made the news last year in the U.S. When Donald Trump tried to say that they were, this massive cartel. They're not a cartel in the sense that they move any sums of cocaine. They're not involved in the cocaine business, but they're involved in extortion. But they mostly started, they had the roots in a prison in Venezuela. The prani of that gang, the leader, he didn't want to leave prison. These guys have more power when they're inside prison. What keeps them in prison as well, some of them stay beyond their sentence. They're safe. They can run their criminal network across Venezuela and across South America and in the US. Extortion, human trafficking, marijuana. They do it from the prison with a phone, a laptop. So that goes to show you the high level of criminality in the prisons in Venezuela. There were high level narcos.
It really reminds me of Pablo Escobar's La Catedral.
La Catedral, yeah. Nightclubs, the prison Paul Keeney was in, there was a regular disco on the roof. They'd hire DJs from Caracas and around the world to perform on the roof. Prostitutes did the rounds. And as Paul said in the book, if I was put in prison as punishment for trafficking cocaine, the justice system put me in a prison where there was more cocaine than I've seen in my life. So this great irony in the whole system. And how the authorities themselves, they have a stake in the crime as well. Like when Paul got arrested with 6 kilos of cocaine. By the time he got to his final, his court case, it was down to about 2 kilos. So where did the 4 kilos of cocaine, where did they disappear to? Obviously, everybody along the way, every cop along the way, and
every step along the way, there is an attempt to extort him by someone who's saying, call your family, tell them to wire this Western Union account and, we'll take care of you. And thankfully, it looks like he had his wits about him on a lot of them. Otherwise, he would have just been fleeced and his position no better off.
Exactly.
But it's just corruption all the way down.
What can I say? Yeah, it's corruption all the way down. It's corruption all the way down. I was fortunate not to get locked up in some scam myself. You get stopped in the streets in Caracas. A couple of cops has happened to me. Got pushed against the wall. Guy searched me. Another guy went through my satchel, and I was terrified. There's a scam that the cops will do. They'll throw a little bag of cocaine into your bag, and the cop will take it out and go, "Ah, look what we found." But if you give me $1,000, we bring it to the ATM, everything disappears. No worries at all. It didn't happen to me, but it happens.
We've tracked Paul through being caught, early days in the prison. I think you've added a lot of color to what life in the prison experience was like. But he self-truncated an 8-year sentence into what was, I think, in the end, 3. So could you run us through actually the characters he met and how he managed to escape?
He managed to escape. Basically, the prison system gives parole after about 2 years. It doesn't anymore. But at the time, for high-level crimes, including narco trafficking, pedophiles, everybody got a shot of parole after 2 years. So he gets out on parole, and the characters that he met, he gets out. I'll go through the parole thing a little bit just to show you more corruption that went on. He was able to get on parole. You had to pass a Spanish exam to show you had the
Oh, that's right.
competency
Yeah.
to work outside the prison and pay your own bills and not be a burden on the state. So his Spanish was pretty bad. My Spanish wasn't great when I first met him. It's good now, but his Spanish wasn't good. So he had to pay off somebody to make sure he passed the Spanish exam. There was a psychological test as well. And people in the prison, yeah, kind of other inmates had been through it, would hold classes and say to all the expat inmates, say, look, foreign inmates, if you want to get out on parole, 1, pass the Spanish exam. Don't worry, pay your way through it. 2, a psychological exam to show you're not crazy. So one major question they'd ask the prisoners was, the prison would say, what's the first thing? Why do you want to get out of the prison? Don't say you want to go back to your family. Don't. Just say you want to spend time in Venezuela and, think about the crime that you committed and, you know, make sure you don't go down that road again. So he paid his way through the psychological, he bluffed his way through the psychological exam. He paid his way through the Spanish part of things, and he got parole. He stayed with this Irish priest. It features in the book. So he had a place to stay. Well, supposedly he had to spend another 6 years in Venezuela, which for him was another prison sentence. Okay, he was a free man, quote unquote, but he was still in this country, thousands of miles from home. He didn't have his family. He had a daughter to get home to. She wasn't 10, 5, she wasn't a kid, but he still had a daughter he wanted to get back to. So he went to one of the parole hearings with another Irish guy. And he came out of the parole hearing. There was an Aussie guy with him as well, if I remember right. And after the parole sentence, a parole hearing, he said that the Australian guy and the other Irish guy said, "We're free." And the Australian guy said, "Yeah, I know we're free. We're outside the prison." He said, "No, but we're going to be really free soon." "What do you mean?" "So I'm getting out of Venezuela. I'm going to escape. I'm not staying here anymore." So that put him into the position where, okay, he's in Venezuela. He's free in the sense he's not inside a jail cell. How's he going to get out of Venezuela? It's an enormous country, as I laid out earlier. So to get out of Venezuela, he cleverly or shrewdly made contacts with a narco gang through an Australian, actually, who was doing some work with him. And he said to the narco gang, "Look, if you get me out of Venezuela, I'll do a drug mule run for you back to Europe." So this Colombian narco gang, "Yeah, fantastic. We'll get this guy out of Venezuela, bring him to Colombia, keep a hold of him. He wins and we win." So it was pretty much that simple. He met the Colombian gang, he did his deal, said, "Yeah, get me across the country, get me into Colombia. I'll get on the plane to Europe and I'll carry your drugs. So that's what he did. It was a nerve-wracking trip. Nearly got caught at the border. The officials looked at his passport. He was terrified he'd get caught. But he got through. He gets into Colombia, gets into Cucuta, which is a border town with Táchira in Venezuela. So he stayed in this, himself and the Irish guy and the one guy from the Colombian narco gang stayed in a hotel at night. So to get out, Paul Keeney knew that if he stayed with this narco gang, if he did agree to take drugs back to Europe, they'd follow him right to the plane probably. Maybe they'd even get on the plane with them. He
Well,
knew he'd
yeah.
probably get caught with the drugs and face prison back again then, back in Europe. So he basically said to he didn't share his plans with the Irish guy. In the middle of the night, he woke him up in the hotel and he said, look, we're going to get out of here. We're going to run. If we stay with this guy, we're going to be stuck with this narco gang. Oh, we could end up in prison back in Ireland. So they fled in the middle of the night, made their own way to Bogota. From there, got the emergency passports and headed home. And met me on the way back. Not only did he get to flee Venezuela, he got a book deal on the way home.
And years after publishing that book, which I saw on Amazon, it has over 1,000 reviews. So presumably it sold really, really well. And it also has a Spanish translation. How much did publishing that book change the trajectory of your sort of writing career and journalistic career?
It didn't. I thought I'd kind of launched this writing career after it. Paul did as well. I got the first royalty check. It went, oh no. Oh no. This can't be real. It can't be that bad.
No.
But Paul said to me, you wouldn't get a hotel room for the night.
No, it can't be that bad.
It was so bad, man. It was
Why is
so
that?
bad.
Is that just because the way Amazon is?
It's the way we had a big publisher. We had one of the biggest publishers in the world, Penguin Random House. We got signed with an imprint with them. Basically, how the publishing industry works, the profits are so small to the writers that's the publishing industry structures the contract that they make all the money. They make 90 to 95% of the income. They give you an advance. It's very small. It's enough to keep you going for a few months to write a book. And they want the advance back.
It's devastating to hear.
Obvious reasons. So when I got that first royalty check, boom, no way I'm going to make money out of this. No way I'm going to make money as a writer. Impossible. I only got back into writing. I was so embittered by the experience that people say, oh, write another book. You wrote a bestseller book. I said, no, I don't want anything to do with the publishing industry again. And that's why I'm self-publishing this novel. I am finished with the publishing world.
How devastating
you get your
was
name
it?
in less. To give you an example, I mean, when I got the royalty check, the first royalty check, it was still a heavy recession in Ireland. So I had to leave Ireland after I wrote the book. I moved to London, get some okay paid work as a journalist for the papers in London. One day I was flying back and forth, as I did from time to time, between Dublin and London. I went through Dublin Airport and there was a major bookshop, W.H. Smith, I think it was. They had a whole shelf dedicated to the Cocaine Diaries.
Oh, that must have felt good.
And I walked by and I said to myself, I'm going over to London to make £120 a day as a journalist. And my book is a bestseller and I'm sitting on that bookstand in that bookshop. This is not right. I hired a lawyer in London, a guy who specialized in publishing. I gave him the contract and I said, there must be a hole in that contract. There must be a way out of it because we have to make money out of this book. He looked at it. I paid him a lot of money. I paid him substantial amount of money to look through the contract for some kind of loophole. Nothing.
Is it just standard?
Absolutely
That's how
nothing.
it rolls?
That's standard. He said to me, look, I've seen worse. So if we didn't necessarily get shafted. It's how the publishing industry treats authors. That's why most people never make a living out of it. So yeah, I'd love to say I have a novel coming out soon Cocaine Diaries came out in 2012. That's a long time ago.
Mm.
But it took me that long to get. I needed a decade away from the publishing industry. I couldn't stomach it again. So only the last few years I said, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to write another book, but this time I'm going to own it.
Mm.
So that's what I'm doing.
What are the plans for distribution if you're self-publishing? Can you still get it into bookshops?
You can do, yeah. There's models to do that. Yeah, I haven't investigated that in too much depth, but yeah, there are kind of hybrid publishers that you can say, okay, you put this in the shops and you get a percentage and I get a percentage. So it can still get into shops.
All right, so years later now, over a decade since the book was published, which details of both telling the story alongside Paul, but as well from Paul's experience, just live with you most?
I mean, somebody telling you they were raped, gang raped, a man telling he was gang raped in Venezuela. I was the first person he told that to. He told his family after. And for somebody to share that with you is just a kind of tragedy. I'm not going to forget that moment. So, journalism, in a way, we're also, this is not discussed much really, but we're kind of counselors as well. Like when I cross Ukraine and I go to people's houses have been destroyed and missile strikes and drone attacks, and I'm the first person that they speak to about that tragedy. So you're partially a counselor in ways as well. So in respect to Paul specifically, that he was raped in the prison obviously stuck with me. How could I forget somebody sharing that intimacy with me, showing their vulnerability to another person like that was quite astounding. And I appreciate him for telling me. I appreciate it that he could reveal that to me. So that's the main thing that came out of that experience that for me from the interviews.
You could sense there was a little bit of vulnerability in your voice there, especially when you're saying being a counselor to some of these people that you had met in Ukraine. And as I was going through your website, I noticed there were lots of stories from Ukraine, particularly of Irish people who had either died or were fighting over there.
They're a small number, even smaller now because several of them are dead. But yeah, they're over there. They're fighting alongside Australians, Kiwis, British, Americans. There's a huge international community of foreign fighters, or less now. Less now since the war has advanced. People get tired of fighting. It's not the best paid job in the world, but I spoke to an ex-foreign fighter yesterday. British guy fought there for 2 years. And I said he was talking about British guys who were over there in the International Legion. I said to him, 4 years during that war. Guys from Western countries who get paid €3,000 a month to be on the front line. I said, I don't understand. Why would you want to be there? He said, it sounds odd, but for them, it's an easy life. It's kind of irony, he said. It's an easy life. They don't have to think. They don't have to think about mortgage payments, car insurance, paying bills. They just sit in a safe house a lot of the time, go out and fight on occasion. And he says, you're institutionalized. So that was his experience.
Did you meet people who you got the sense were not even there for some noble defense of the Ukrainian sovereignty, but simply just because it was a paycheck and an opportunity to do what they were trained to do and love to do?
Initially, no, they're there. They're definitely there because they believe in Ukraine. That's what brought them there in the first place. But over time, they get sucked into the lifestyle. Me and you and anybody sane wouldn't want to be on the front line in Ukraine, but they become conditioned to it. But yeah, of course, they're still there. They still believe in Ukraine. They weren't no Western person is attracted to a paycheck in Ukraine. €3,000 a month. I mean, you could get that working in a simple job back in Ireland. You don't need to go to war. So they went there because they believed in Ukraine. That's the reason I brought them. That's the reason why they're still there. But the reason why they can't leave is that they're institutionalized. War is all that they know after 4 years.
Is there an international legion fighting for Russia as well?
It's probably not branded the International Legion like it is in Ukraine, but yeah, there are foreign fighters on the ground in Russia. The BBC did a piece recently. I didn't look at it, but they tracked down foreigners who were fighting for Russia. The numbers wouldn't be as high as Ukraine, it'd be small. Dozens, maybe.
Mm.
Certainly not up to the hundreds or thousands, up to 20,000 that fought in for Ukraine, at least in the beginning of the war.
Jeff, before we wrap this up, I just wanted to ask whether there was anything in particular that comes to mind which we should have spoken about but didn't, or a detail from Venezuela or your life in Venezuela that you think is worth mentioning we didn't cover.
Nothing jumps to mind. What I say is I kind of feel bad about writing negatively about Venezuela. I hope one day to write something positive. The book obviously shows that the worst thing that can happen to a human being to be raped by anti-drugs police officers, to be thrown into a hellhole prison, and now Venezuela is thrown into further chaos after the U.S. abducted Maduro. The regime is still in power. Nothing's changed for now. Now what? I look forward to the day I go back to Venezuela, probably when the next elections come and this lunatic regime is voted out. I want to go back to Venezuela and report positively about the country, not negative, not just write bad stories again, horror stories. I want to hear people saying, maybe not things are not perfect, of course, but people saying we're looking forward to the future.
Is there any optimism in your heart about that future you can look forward to? Where do you fall on US intervention or not? Will they make it a better place? Will they just spiral into further chaos?
I can't say. Well, I mean, regularly speak to Venezuelans who live around the world, people I know. A Venezuelan woman who lives in Spain, I'm regularly in contact with her. She's very hopeful. She says that of the 7-8 million people that left the country, many want to come home. They're educated. They're doctors, lawyers, dentists, construction workers. They want to go back to their home country and rebuild that country from basically the scratch, from the ruins that it is into something powerful. That's what she hopes. As a journalist for 2 decades, I'm too cynical to see the world that way. All I can say is I hope that's what happens. I hope that's what happens.
Yeah, Venezuela must have, over the last 2 decades, experienced among the most, if not the most, intense brain drains of any country around the world. And the diaspora is so well represented, especially in Europe. My old colleague was Venezuelan, had some old mates, colleagues as well in Amsterdam who were Venezuelan. And I don't know if they're necessarily pining to go back, but it seems like anyone who could left did leave. Therefore, the population figure you gave earlier of 27 million, I was assuming it'd be closer to 50. So obviously it's a struggling place. There's 2 questions I try to ask every guest. The first is about serendipity, but given the story of serendipitously running into Paul Keeney, it's incomprehensible that we're going to get a better response than that. So rather, I'll just jump straight to the last one, which is a country which you, Jeff, are particularly bullish on looking forward into the future.
Ukraine. They have to finish the war. They have to win it as best as they can. Not win it. I say that quote unquote. But as soon as there's a ceasefire and a peace deal, Ukraine has a great future. It's going to become part of the European Union family, maybe even part of the NATO security alliance. That's NATO isn't guaranteed. Security guarantees are guaranteed. But as soon as the war stops, there's already frameworks in place for Ukraine to join the EU. They have a very bright future compared to where they came from. Peaceful and prosperous.
All right, Mr. Farrell, in the description, we'll put a link to a waiting list for the novel that's going to be coming out. As well, there will be a link to Cocaine Diaries, the audio edition. Is there anything else that you want to draw the audience's attention towards?
Nothing. That's great. You put those links in. Very welcome. If people want to follow my reporting from Venezuela from afar, I have a podcast called A Country in Crisis, and I'm currently interviewing Venezuelans, both abroad and in Venezuela itself. So there
Amazing.
you go.
That'll be there too. It was a pleasure
Great.
talking to you, mates. There have
Pleasure
not
to
been
talk
enough
to you, Ron.
Irishmen that have brandished this podcast, so I'm extremely thrilled that we got one
I
in.
appreciate it. Nice one, Ryan. Thank you very much.
All right, mate.
Thank you.
All the best.